Ali Simons. I'm an executive member of the World Association for Christian Communication North American region, and I work as senior editor at the Anglican Church of Canada in Toronto. For those of you who don't know, the World Association for Christian Communication is an international organization that promotes communication as a basic human right. Today on this webinar, we're excited to have Arnie Svanner Danielson present to us. The title of this webinar is Fragmented but Wholesome, Iceland's Church and Society Dialogues via Social Media. Arnie is a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Iceland. He currently serves as Director of Communication for the ELCI. He has worked with church communication since 2001 and is a specialist in use of the web and social media for church communication. I've had the pleasure of hearing Arnie speak before at an ecumenical communicators gathering in Toronto, so I've met him virtually. He was on the screen there before. I really appreciated his insights and his clear sharing of stories from the unique context of the church in Iceland. So before we get started, just a logistical overview. Arnie will be presenting in a couple of seconds. We'll be hearing his voice and seeing his PowerPoint slides. And after his presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask him questions. And we'll be doing that through the chat function, which you should be seeing through the GoToWebinar system. I'd like to thank Aaron Green, who's another executive member of WAC North America, who is helping us out on the back end. So I will pass the webinar over to Arnie.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you guys all over the world. And, well, this is one of the wonders of technology. Just a brief question. Do you see my screen? Do you see the slides? Ali?
I can see them.
Okay,
yes,
good.
Yeah,
Then I'll move on. Hello to all of you. I greet you from Reykjavik, Iceland. And today I want to share with you, well, we could say 2 case studies and a handful of lessons that I think we can learn from them. And then hopefully we'll have a good discussion afterwards. The first case study has to do with church and school and a debate we had in Iceland 2 years ago about the relationship and the connection between church and school. The second is more recent and has to do with the church and the constitution, because just 10 days ago we had a referendum on a new constitution here in Iceland, and one of the questions asked had to do with the relations, well, had to do with the article about the church in the Constitution and to some extent the relationship between church and state. And my approach will be that of social media and church. So let's just move on. Approximately 78% of the population are members of the church. And for a very long time we have enjoyed quite good relations with the major institutions in society. This includes the schools. We have in the recent years, and this was partly following, we made a new educational policy for the Church of Iceland, I think 7 or 8 years ago, that was approved in the Church Synod. And after this, there was a discussion about whether we should try to formalize well, some guidelines, could we say, about how we should have these relations. And there was really good cooperation regarding this, where you would have representatives from the church, from the school administration, from the teachers and others working together to establish these guidelines. And more or less the general consensus was that if you have the schools coming into the churches, say the church takes priority. If the church is called into the school takes priority. Then in 2010, in Reykjavik is the capital of Iceland, there came or was set forth a proposal for new guidelines, and this was done as an initiative of a committee that was working on behalf of the city, the Human Rights Committee. And they presented a first draft of these guidelines that seemed to severely limit the possibility for cooperation and to some extent also seemed to be a bit prejudiced against religion, not just the church, but religion in general. And, well, a conversation ensued. It took place in person, it took place in various media, on TV, in newspapers, on the web. Now, of course, this was a, you could say, modern kind of conversation, modern within quotation marks, in the sense that it was a conversation where one of the parties writes something or says something and another one responds. So people didn't really meet in person at first. They just spoke at each other, shall we say. And some of the leaders of the church in Reykjavik proposed a meeting. They proposed that the Human Rights Committee, some key people from the church, and some of the leaders of the school, individuals who had invested a lot in this issue, would meet in person and try to clear up some misunderstanding about the issue, or at least agree to disagree. The Human Rights Committee of the church, no, of the city, declined. They didn't want to meet. They said the matter isn't developed enough to have such a discussion. But at the same time, the discussion was ongoing, especially in the social media. And then, well, something interesting happened. The members of the committee that didn't want to have the formal discussion with the church representatives entered into a discussion about the proposed guidelines on Facebook, in social media. Or to be more specific, the vice chairman of the committee entered into a conversation on my page on Facebook. So you would have the press officer of the church and the vice chairman of the committee having an unofficial conversation, shall we say, about this very public matter that the committee didn't want to engage in an official discussion about. Is it complicated? Yes. Is it full of possibilities? Yes, most definitely. Now, in a sense, I think this is, well, I think it's highly interesting, to say the least. I think it's an example of how discussion can and does take place in modern society, using these new media, using these communication channels that we perhaps didn't even imagine a decade or two ago. I think the most of the discussion that actually took place about church and school during this period took place in social media. There were some pastors who took initiative on behalf of the church, not as the formal designated spokesperson, but rather as a person interested who, just by taking a stand and writing, sort of injects himself or herself into the issue. And in particular, there was one pastor in Reykjavik who had conversations in social media, on Facebook, on the blogs. Now, because of this, and this is part of what I mean by fragmented, it was really complicated or difficult, shall we say, to get an overview of the whole conversation. And it was definitely very difficult. But at the same time, it meant that you actually engaged a very large group in this important discussion, and that aspects of it reached the result of the whole tweaked a bit. And I think they would be useful in school. And I'm certain that the discussion in social media played a part in this. Now, this was the first case. The second has to do with the constitution here in Iceland. We have had an ongoing discussion, shall we say, in the society ever since we had the economic collapse in the fall of 2008. That is, shall we say, the safeguards against some of the problems, loads healthier values, values that the society here in Iceland agrees upon. And for that purpose, we established in 2011, 25 people were appointed to this council, and they worked for, I think it was a new constitution. These were originally in a sort of, there were problems with the eventually appointed by the parliament. New constitution that was handed over to the parliament at the end of July last year, regarding the article about this national church. And their suggestion was actually that instead of having an article that permitted the state to make a law about, so this is actually a framework too. Now, 10 days ago, we voted on their draft. This is the ballot asked. The first one was, do you want the parliament in Iceland to use the draft presented by the Constitutional Council as a basis for a new constitution? And then the third question was, do you want an article about the national church in the new constitution? So what do you do if you are a national church? How do you prepare for something like this? How do you engage in a conversation? Do you say nothing because you're in that kind of position in society that you trust the members of the church? I mean, the members are 78% approximately. Do you trust them just to sort of take care of it? Do you engage in a very active campaign where you are lobbying for your position? Do you try to sort of inform the public, to encourage a conversation? All of this was discussed quite a lot in the church, and the governing bodies of the church met to discuss this. Both the Church Council, which is like the executive committee of the Church of Iceland, and the General Synod, which is the highest governing body, issued statements. And the gist of them was that this is an important election. We want you to say yes to the article about the church, and we feel it's important that you participate in this. Now, what's interesting is that the church didn't really engage in a very active campaign. It chose the third option I mentioned earlier. That is to say, it saw its role in this respect as more or less informing the public. Yes, it said, we think you should say yes. But then the thrust was to inform people what kind of relationship does the church have with the state, what does the article in the Constitution mean, what does the church do. And this woman, who is our newly elected bishop, Agnes Sigurðardóttir, she became the key spokesperson for the church. Now, she appeared in interviews, she appeared in talk shows to discuss the topic. At the same time, she also became one of the public figures in Iceland who were outspoken on behalf of the election itself. And she, for example, appeared in a video campaign that was organized by a grassroots organization called the Constitutional Society, where she actually appeared alongside celebrities in Iceland who were encouraging people to get out and vote and to take a stand on some of the issues. And she was there, well, in the video, she didn't say, just go out and vote and say yes to the article about the church, but rather she was there to say, I think it's important that you vote because that's our democratic right and we should participate in the process, and I feel that's important. And then she talked a bit about the sort of basic values of the church with regards to this. And I think that's interesting because on the one hand, it sort of points to her position, and on the other hand, I think it came as a bit of a surprise for many that she and that the church didn't sort of campaign more actively. The church established a website which was like a subset of the main Church of Iceland website. This site has, it's still up and running. It has information about the relationship between church and state. It has information about what this article means, etc., etc. And it encourages people to participate in the discussion. But there were no printed advertisements. There were no printed leaflets. There were no advertisements for the approach or position of the church in any media. The only advertisements bought by the church were advertisements for this particular website. That is to say, if you want to know what this particular article means, then you can find the information here. And we can contrast this with ads that were run on the radio from a major humanist society that said, say no to this article. Now, as with the church-school debate, we had a very lively discussion about this in social media, with a lot of people participating. And some of the some of the strongest pieces you could read, for example, on Facebook, actually came from people who weren't members of the churches, but who had an understanding of the relevance and the role of the church in society. There was input from many pastors, from many lay people, and I think because the only, you could say, formal material that the church distributed was on the web, it followed quite naturally that social media became an even more important part of the church's work in preparation for the referendum. Now, I think what we saw here in Iceland with regards to this is an example of how church communication is developing. And I think there is an implicit, because this was not stated explicitly in the months leading up to the referendum, I think there's an implicit understanding that the new media are important and that social media is the place of these key conversations for the church. So, what was the result of the vote? Well, in the end, 57.1% were for keeping the article in the Constitution and 42.9% for abolishing it. At the same time, 66.3% of the voters said yes to the draft of the Constitutional Council, and a majority said yes to each of the articles that were inquired about in the referendum, except the one about the church. So the article about the church was actually the only suggestion that the Constitutional Council made that was rejected. So this was the second example I wanted to show you. What can we learn from it? Well, we have here in Iceland two cases of a vital discussion about church and society that actually takes place mostly in social media. What can we learn from this? What steps does it encourage us to take? Well, I have 4 points I want to make. I think both of these cases serve to illustrate that new media, especially social media, are at the heart of church communication today, both implicitly and explicitly. I think they enable a lot more people to participate in the discussion. I think they make the discussion more, you could say, spread out. And I think, in a sense, they illustrate democracy in action, where each member is fully prepared and fully able to participate. And from a theological standpoint, it makes me, as a Lutheran pastor and a theologian, it makes me think about this concept that the reformers, for example, Martin Luther had about the priesthood of all of the baptized, which is in a sense directed against the hierarchy that puts one above the other. We can talk about this. Secondly, I think while it's true that the discussion is more fragmented, and it is, in the sense that there isn't one place which you can go to get an overview or to follow the discussion, there is reason to believe that the whole discussion will be richer because there are so many more participating in it, and that the discussion itself can be a bit empowering. We can focus more on the message rather than the person presenting the message. But at the same time, I think this makes even more demands of our people, of the people participating in the discussion. Third, I think the issue of participation is a key issue. The discussion will take place in social media. Do we want to participate? It's not dependent on our participation. We can't control the discussion. We can't stop it from happening, but we can influence it. I think one of the things we learned from the case of the church and the school is that it's important to be there, to be around both for the official and the unofficial discussion. And I think, and this is a key issue also for me, I think it's very important for us to engage many people and to empower many people who are active in the church, people working for the church, volunteers and others, to work with social media. Now, the fourth issue has to do with the, we could say, daily life of the church. And I think that's something we need to consider. How can and will this affect the daily life of the church? How can we implement social media even better in the daily life? How can we enable the people working for the church and the parishioners? What needs to be changed in the training of pastors, for example? And how can we make even better use of the new technologies also, of the smartphones and the tablets on a day-to-day basis? Change or these central places we have to work better alongside this. Now, to summarize, I think the churches are well positioned to participate in social media. At the same time, I think that training is vital, and I think empowering this is vital. And I think this needs to be implemented on all levels of the churches, from the bottom to the top or from the top to the bottom, or however you want to see the organization, in the sense that we need to work with the archbishops and the bishops and the deans and the pastors and the deacons and the volunteers. Everyone should be empowered to work with social media. I think we need to be, as churches, very aware of the changes that are taking place, not just in church communication, but in communication in society in general. And I think it's important that we know the strengths and the weaknesses of the new forms of communication. And I think we should encourage active participation. And just to give one example of a very small change that I think we should consider at least, we should make it a part of our project management process, shall we say, to have an analysis of communication needs and to make a communication plan, so that just as we are asked to define how much money we will spend on a particular project and how we are going to spend it, we should define how we are going to communicate the project what kind of communication needs. And just as we present a budget for the coming year, we should present a communication plan. Because we need to work the communication needs of the church into the mindset so that we don't think about actions, projects, tasks without thinking about how we intend to communicate. And I want to share with you a quote from a bishop in England, in Bradford, called Nick Baines, who blogs and tweets and is a well, in many ways I think he's a good role model for bishops with regards to this. He writes a lot and I think he's sharp. He wrote earlier this month, churches need to develop competence in understanding the particular media and the languages that need to be spoken in order for different audiences to hear. Churches need to move from a reactive to a proactive mindset, shaping the agenda or discourse, not always responding to it. And, well, because, you could say, contemporary media demand interactivity and interconnectivity. And I think that summarizes this quite well. And that's what I wanted to say to you today. Now, we have like half an hour for questions and discussions and ideas and thoughts. And I'm looking very much forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arni. It was a fascinating presentation and certainly thought-provoking. So I would encourage all of you out there listening in your various cities and towns to type in your questions into the chat function in GoToWebinar, and I will read them aloud and Arni will answer them. So I have a question to start us off. First of all, can everyone hear me okay?
I hear you.
Is my voice coming through? Okay, great. So Arni, I'm curious about the church's organizing role, especially around the referendum. Obviously you were monitoring what was happening in these various conversations, and you were getting the messages out from the church's perspective. You emphasized that it was mainly online. But how is the church inserting itself into these fragmented discussions? How are you participating in Facebook, Twitter, and on blogs? I'm thinking that this is an especially challenging place to be because you certainly want to participate in these fragmented discussions. They're important, as you noted, but the church would not want to be seen as manipulating these conversations. So can you tell us a little bit about your strategy?
Well, in this case, and I think this is one of the interesting aspects, this was actually very fragmented because what the church did on a national level was mainly to, well, it laid out this material and then it encouraged people to participate. But there wasn't really an active work on behalf of the church to inject itself. It was more a question of specific pastors or individuals taking initiative. So it wasn't the case that there was a team of people working, you know, on behalf of the national office of the church, trying to monitor everything and injecting themselves in some manner into the discussion. So it was. I think that's one of the things that makes me interested in it is that it was really an example of participated.
Yes, that's an interesting response. Just as a quick for participating in the discussion, I like what you're saying, that it's often more authentic when it's individuals engaging in a discussion and not the institution. That's kind of an obvious point. But how was the church sort of connecting with those pastors on the ground, as it were? Well, was there a role of training or coaching them?
Well, we have. I mean, we worked a lot with training in the past, but there wasn't really formal coordination taking place during this time. So it was more a question of their initiative, shall we say, and their work. And all of the pastors in Iceland, they have access to a joint a joint website and intranet where there is a lot of discussion going on, but there was no active control going on. I was even on the sidelines. I'm on Patreon.
Organic conversations. Sorry, Arnie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That makes this even more interesting, and I think that's to the idea I was trying to convey, that we need how can I put it? Enabling people beforehand to organize everything from a central office. We teach people how the media works, and we trust them to participate, just as we trust them to participate in any other discussion, really.
Thank you. That's a great point. I know that I'll be taking some of those findings back to our work at the Anglican Church of Canada. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So we have some other questions coming in. I'm going to read one. So the question is, while the churches of the Reformation embraced new communication technologies when it was the Gutenberg press, why do you think there is resistance in some church quarters to embracing the new communication technology, especially social media?
That's a good question. I think, I have the, I suppose my point of view is that of the church here in Iceland. And we've seen that the church has been quite open to using social media here. And many pastors also. And I think, well, to some extent, I think it's a generational matter. That you have many of the older pastors, the older people here, are not that web savvy, shall we say, and they don't trust the new media that much. They don't think it matters that much. And to be honest, this is one of the things that came as a surprise when I started looking at the case study of the Constitution issue, because we have a I think on the very high levels in the church, you don't have that much explicit recognition. In the church council, in the church synod, you don't have that much explicit recognition of the importance of social media. But still you use it, even if it's almost by accident. And I think that points to the, could we say, the pervasiveness of these kinds of mediums. And I guess when we're looking at the Reformation times, they used it because it worked. The Gutenberg, the possibility of printing these small leaflets that sort of drove the point of the Reformation home and enabled the masses to read. This was the least expensive, most efficient way to do it. And I think the same is the same forces are at work now. We can, in a less expensive way, get our point across using the web. But I would also, and I think that's one of the things I would like to look into myself, is the difference between Gutenberg and social media. There is a good book I was reading called Tweet If You Heart Jesus by Elizabeth Dressler. And she is actually in that book doing a comparison of, for example, the methods of reading before Gutenberg, where reading was a very social activity, and what you will find on social media, where the discussion you will find about an article or specific texts, it can actually be a highly social activity, in contrast to what you would find in the Gutenberg era. where you get your book and you read it, and it's a very solitary thing. So yeah, a long answer. I think.
No, that was great. Thank you, Arnie. We've got lots of questions coming in, so I'll move to another topic. This is a question from Rebecca, and she's bringing us back to the school debate. She's wondering, how did it come about that the chair of the board talked via Facebook? Did you seek him out on Facebook? Did he seek you? Had you had any contact with him before this?
Well, we were friends on Facebook, or acquaintances on Facebook before, actually, and we hadn't talked. I mean, he's a famous writer, this guy, and I know his wife, so we had sort of earlier we had become friends on Facebook, but hadn't really had any discussion. And then what happened was that I posted a link to either a sermon or an article that referred to this debate on my Facebook page. And then there was a bit of a discussion that formed, and he sort of came in and participated in it and wanted to clarify these issues. And then it sort of continued from that. So no, this was actually the first formal contact we had. Yeah.
I'm just going to chime in with a comment from someone out there listening named Sherilyn. She just wants to say that she's affirming your experience and that these issues resonate with her. There have been many great discussions on Facebook that our organization has held, and they've been hard as a communicator not to manipulate or control. So I'm going to do a little bit of interpretation. I think that what you've done in terms of allowing an organic communication to emerge, conversation to emerge, has been interesting to hear. So this is a comment from Sherilyn. Here's another question from Jesse. He's wondering, was the leadership of your church supportive of giving some authority to the voices in social media? If so, was that because your national leadership already involved, because they could see the results of your work in the past, or because they were willing to take a risk? It's very interesting.
Well, I think I've been, we've how can I put this? We have enjoyed, in recent years, a very supportive, generally supportive church leadership when it comes to these kinds of, with this kind of media. And this year, in the span of 12 months, we have 3 bishops in Iceland. One who is the Bishop of Iceland, and then 2 assistant bishops. And in the span of 12 months, we actually I think that was relevant. You campaign to become a bishop in Iceland. There are 200 to 600 people who have votes, and all of the people who were nominated for these positions and campaigned to get them, they used social media a lot. So we actually have 3 bishops who are all or have been very active in social media. And I think that is very important, because you need to have used it yourself to fully understand it. And I think we are lucky in the sense that our church leadership is actually has first-hand knowledge of this and of its impact. And I suppose the next question is, how do we then sort of develop that further? And we're also making use. The General Synod, which meets once a year regularly, established a new communication policy for the Church of Iceland 1 year ago in November 2011, and there is a heavy emphasis on social media in that policy, which is also quite good as a resource and as a background for us. It enables us. It actually mandates that we make good use of this kind of media in our work.
Thank you. We have another question here from Erin. She is wondering about the role of experts in in social media?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just grab our question again. So for example, that could be a theologian, pastor, or bishop, and she's wondering how these experts function in these democratic social media spaces. Is the idea of an expert useful at all in these kinds of digital conversations?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, I think one of the sort of could we say one of the problems, one of the challenges is that on Facebook, on the one hand, you're no more important than the next person. It's all a question of how you communicate, how well you communicate. If you communicate well, if you're writing interesting things, if you're posting interesting things, people will sort of, and if you write in a way that encourages a conversation will follow. On the other hand, I think celebrities always have the upper hand. I mean, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Pinterest, wherever, people tend to flock around celebrities. So, for example, the bishops here in Iceland, they tend to have a following. With regards to the experts as such, I think they are most useful in a supporting role, at least when it comes to the social media experts. I think I've seen my role not as the one who perhaps leads the conversation, but rather as the one who supports all of the other people in communicating. And I think that stems from so as more being in the background. And I think that comes from the fact that we are yes, we have 78% of the population here in Iceland, but the population is very low. So we're not a large church. And we have to, we don't have a large communication department here. So we actually have to, get a lot of people to pitch in, shall we say. So to answer, I think the experts online, the experts in the conversation, the theologians, the pastors, the bishops, they start out on the same level as everybody else. I mean, if they're writing interesting things, they can have, they can establish themselves as the experts. And I think the ones who are well known before they sort of enter into the social media space will enjoy that recognition. But when it comes to the communication experts, I think our time is well spent in, well, on the one hand, leading by example, showing what you can do, and on the other hand, training people.
Thank you, Arnie. I like that thought of leading by example and showing what we can do. Here's a question from Sheila. She says, I am intrigued by your suggestion that we offer training in social media to help those who don't naturally use social media to do so. Could you provide an example of how you did training with church leaders in social media?
Well, we've held a lot of courses actually for smaller and larger groups. And quite many courses actually for groups of pastors. I mean, and we're currently organizing one for the 3 bishops in Iceland to help them both better understand the nature of communication in social media, and also to help them to see where their gifts lie. And I think what we've done is partly we've talked about the possibilities of this kind of media, and then we've tried to look into their strengths, what comes naturally to them. And then we try to play to that. So my goal is actually, with regards to my 3 bishops, to on the one hand get them to understand social media better, to help them to understand it better, and then provide them with training that's focused on their needs and their strengths. And the idea is to I mean, I think on the one hand, we want them to understand communication, and on the other hand, we want them to be efficient. So there's a lot of one-on-one training involved, actually. And my plan has been to make, you could say, a communication strategy for each of them that sort of centers on their strengths. I don't know, I mean, this may be too vague to sort of answer the question completely. Yeah, but I'll stop here.
No, thank you, Arnie. I think I'll bring up another question, sort of in a similar vein. This one is from Caitlin. Do you have any advice on getting the bureaucracy of the National Church on board regarding social media when there is this fear of not being able to control it, or when the bureaucracy takes forever to respond to something and they don't understand the timeliness of social media? How do you respond to them? How do you help this bureaucracy or work with them?
Well, if they only respond to fear, then just inspire a greater fear in them. If you don't participate, you will have no control. You know, as I said in my presentation, the discussion is going to take place. The question is, do you want to be there? And if you don't want to be there, you sort of give up the right to influence it. But apart from that, I think it's just it's a question of groundwork. You know, you have to you just use every opportunity you get to talk about it, to present the possibilities. And then what we've done, which has actually been quite, we've done these smaller pilot projects using different kinds of media, and then just know your statistics. I mean, it's and you know, point it out, because often the people in the bureaucracy, they respond to numbers, and it's very easy on the web to get numbers. You know, a video that's been watched 2,000 times, 4,000 times, 10,000 times. They can respond to that, or photos that are, you know, looked at X thousand times. So I think, you know your statistics, and just keep at it, keep working on it.
Thank you, Arnie. You're bringing up a fascinating topic of measuring social media and the question of metrics. That might be a great topic for a future webinar. I know that's something that I hear a lot of in the communication circles I'm part of. So that's going to be our last question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Arnie. I'll give you a chance to respond. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, well, but I think, just with regards to the metrics, I think we should, what we could do, and I think this may influence the larger discussion. I think we should sort of bring up the question of you know, we have the Google Analytics that many of us use, that give us an insight into who is using the service we provide on the web, and we have the Facebook Insights, etc. And we should put them in the context of the church analytics, because actually you know a lot more about the people who are using the service, in many cases, of the church online than offline. And I think that's also one possibility of engaging in this conversation with the church administration, that we know a lot, we have the numbers, we know the people reached to some extent, and we know even the time they've spent. So we actually, using the new media, using social media, we have the opportunity to know a lot more about the people we are working with and working for. Maybe that's one of the selling points.
Yes, fascinating. I would love to have your compelling voice around the boardroom here where I work. I know that we're having conversations like that definitely in Toronto from time to time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you for a great webinar, Arnie. It was a pleasure to hear your insights on these two fascinating case studies, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I'm just going to close with a couple of housekeeping items. I wanted to let you all know that we are hosting our second webinar on social media for social change on Thursday, November 29th from 11 till 12 Eastern Time. This webinar will profile a very successful social and digital campaign. It's called Mission One, and it was run by the United Church of Christ, an American church, in November 2011. Mission One was an 11-day church-wide campaign that fought hunger and hunger-related social justice issues through advocacy, fundraising, and community service. Our presenters for this webinar will be Tiffany French and Jesse Palatucci. They both are staff at the United Church of Christ and were closely involved with the campaign. Again, that's November 29th from 11 to 12 Eastern Time. And you will be able to find registration information very soon on our WAC North America website, which is north-america.wacglobal.org. The last thing is that when you sign out of this webinar, there will be a very short survey where you can give feedback about what you've seen and heard here today. We would love for you to fill this out so we can continue to improve these webinars. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.